Welcome to the South African Business Schools Association's third Perspectives webinar series. My name is Fulu Netera, the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Management Sciences at the Durban University of Technology. Today I welcome you in my role as the Vice Chairperson of SABSA and on behalf of SABSA Chairperson Dr. Randall Jonas. As the executive of SABSA, we would like to pass our heartfelt gratitude to SABSA General Manager Ann Wilson and to the team at Gordon Institute of Business Science at the University of Pretoria for all the necessary arrangements that they've put towards this Perspective webinar series. Our main speaker for the day is Paul Ofeti, who is the executive of engineering services at the Absa Group. Paul will be speaking on the topic change, challenges, successes, on the success story of the completion of the Absa's 3-year 17 billion separation project, the demerger from the Barclays Group, which was undertaken on time and under budget, thereby defying analyst expectations. Paul Ofeti will be interviewed by Dr. Maurice Mthombeni, who is the interim dean at the Gordon Institute of Business Sciences. I will not go into details about the speaker nor the interviewer, except to say that Paul comes with extensive experience, having been a CEO at ArcelorMittal and the head of projects at Eskom. Once again, welcome and feel free to participate. Over to you, Maurice.
Dimachero Nifulu, and thank you very much. And I'd like to echo your acknowledgement of our colleagues at SABSA, particularly the chairman, Professor Rendell, as well as Anne. And I look forward to doing my best to represent and fly the flag of SABSA. And I'm so glad today to be joined by one of the leading executives in the country. And so let me try and honor his Irish heritage and see if I can pronounce your name, Paul O'Flaherty. Is that better?
100%.
Much better. Okay, so I rolled my tongue and hopefully I haven't slaughtered anything in the process. As Fulu said, Paul, you're not a typical banker, right? So you come from our least favorite company in South Africa, Eskom. I think that was your last role before you joined Absa.
No, ArcelorMittal, and then I was working in Dubai.
Okay, you were in Dubai. But let's start with Absa because anything could happen. I know that they've said there's no load shedding until 4 p.m. today, but that's not guaranteed. When you think about project management and the project execution that you and your team delivered at Absa, are there any lessons that you learned at Eskom that played a role in contributing to the successes at Absa?
Yeah, I think, well, thank you, Maurice, for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity. That's quite a question because there were a lot of failings under my watch at Eskom as well as successes. But if I had to reflect back, the size and complexity of what we were trying to do at Eskom certainly put me in good stead when involving myself with the Absa separation. Trying to understand the integration of the various suppliers, trying to understand the schedule, what must land first, trying to get a real handle on the monies. All of those experiences put me in good stead for Absa. The difference being, I think, is that when Eskom started their build program prior to my joining, a lot of the skills weren't there. So Eskom had to rebuild the skills and use a lot of subcontractors and outsourced parties to help them, whereas in the case of Absa, which is superb for this country and for Absa, those skills were managed internally. So although there were suppliers used, the key players in this journey was all internal, and the big shout out from me is to them.
Absolutely. So let's reflect on and anchor our conversation in Absa's latest results, and possibly let me start with the topic that is affecting every human being in the world right now, which is COVID-19. And we see that in the results of Absa, the impact of COVID-19 has been spectacular. And so Absa recently reported an 82% decline in interim earnings. And that is informed partly by increasing your impairment charges, which is provisions effectively, fourfold to 14.7 billion rand. Right? So that's quite significant. How has life been in running an organization? Because the last lap of the integration has been during this lockdown phase. So how were you able to achieve your targets during this very difficult and unusual phase? Because you didn't plan for this when you started 3 years ago.
I think had COVID happened a year ago, we'd probably be having a different conversation, because I would hate to have that would have completely stalled this program. So luckily, because we were really, really fixated about this 5th of June deadline, even though we could extend that to December, we never let off on that. And when the COVID hit us, we were busy landing systems and training people, because remember, separation affects the entire African region. And there are the war stories of getting people back home on the last plane out, getting people back to their countries on the last plane out. Phenomenal effort by the Absa people under extreme conditions, and the suppliers who helped us just focus on the 5th of June and get it done. So amazing resilience to get it done. And while we were doing that, the company was responding to COVID, in terms of everything that we needed to do, working remotely, etc., etc. Yeah.
So let's just reflect on what does it mean for the company reflecting to COVID. So according again to the latest half-year results, you spent about 70.7 billion rand in COVID relief, of which 8.7 billion was to individuals, 25 billion was to corporates, and then another 35 billion to Africa, to Absa's regional offices, which is the 10 other African countries in which Absa is invested. And you were doing this in areas like credit payment relief, waiving of statutory fees, widening the definition of loss of income to provide. So it's not like you knew what this definition should be, but you widened it to become more accessible, and a whole host of other measures. Now, help me to understand how the projects that you undertook helped you to be able to execute on this kind of COVID relief.
So maybe I can talk to that, because the first thing in this is what you've got to remember as well is we had our new CEO arriving end of January. And shame, in March COVID hits. That's quite a way to join an organization. So the rallying call around Exco was very, very clear. And the ability to respond quickly, I think we can pay respect, because many of these executives were involved in separation, in how we manage a crisis, how we manage and focus on one thing. And that was really, really good response. So, each of those executives in their areas took handle. But when it came to projects itself, I think in the tech world, our biggest challenges initially was remote working. Making sure our people can get to home and can actually log into the systems in a safe and secure manner. And so our access through the various connections we have, we improved that very quickly from about 5,000 user capability from working from home to over 60,000. And that was done very, very quickly with ups and downs, and we have a very stable environment, and we continue to work on it. And also in the tech environment specifically, the majority of our people work in the offices, and we have our big data center in Randburg. Today, 80% of our people are working from home. We can run data centers from home. We can support users on their laptops from home. So it's been an unbelievable lesson about the art of the possible, and it's being in the crisis that forces you to think differently. And I think that separation has taught the bank that. And I think the ability to respond to, separation wasn't a breeze. Separation wasn't always easy. There were many things we had to correct, but that resilience, sticking to the task, self-correcting, I think stood us in really, really good stead, particularly in the tech space where the projects are run.
So I'd like to explore some of those lessons. So we're talking about Absa basically spending 17 billion in 3 years, which effectively is equivalent to you, if the shareholders were willing to sell to you, buying Dis-Chem and having some change, 2 or 3 billion in change, or buying Coronation Fund Managers and having some change, right? So it's not small change, right? And so what I'm interested in is if you could help us to understand, using some of the words that you used, some of the lessons that you've learned. So you use words like the art of the possible. How did this emerge? So that's the outcome. Resilience is an outcome. I'm more interested in what is the input, right? And so what did you learn about the Absa culture and the Absa people that we could maybe apply to other organizations, especially outside of financial services, given I think many organizations may not have the luxury of the budget that you have, but they have the challenge of the problems that you also have, and there may be lessons there that we could apply from an input perspective. What should you be doing? A step-by-step guide, so to speak.
So I had a very unique experience with separation because I was a non-executive director at Absa when separation was announced. So the first 15 months of the journey of separation, I was actually a non-exec, and then I joined as an executive right for the last 2/3. The interesting point, I think, was when Barclays announced it was a surprise to everybody. And I remember sitting at the board and having emergency board meetings. But I think the first key to the success was complete ownership and accountability from the top. And that was the board, the CEO at the time, Maria Ramos, and the executives. So in my experience doing many projects and living through the construction industry as well, if you don't have the support from the top, if there's no singular focus to get this done from the top, and there is divided opinion, you will fail, in my view. And I think if you do all the project management research, leadership from the top counts enormously. What the board did then was make sure that all those governance checkpoints for the executives were busy negotiating and figuring out. I mean, some of those stats are quite frightening. Barclays had embedded themselves in Absa for a very long time. So when you come down to your basic policies, how do you hire someone? How do you do leave policy? How do you, all of these, how do you procure? All the systems, particularly in the Arrow regions and particularly in CIB, were managed from London by Barclays. So they're really, so they are now leaving. So that is a shock to any system. So ownership from the top, critical. The second part, which is critical, was making sure you understand your scope. And there was extensive work done by the executive team at the time and said, well, in how many areas are we actually affected by Barclays? Let's live in a world of where there is no Barclays. And they come up with some amazing numbers of more than 2,000 touch points. There were more than 300 policies and procedures that you're integrated with, close to 200 systems. And so understanding that scope is really, really important without actually the design. So it's understanding where you are. And then the next part that was important was negotiating the money, because quite frankly, Barclays didn't have to pay anything. They were separating. They were selling Absa, but obviously a negotiation took place, and I remember having heated debates at the board as a non-exec against the execs about, is the money enough? And well done to the team, it was enough. And so leadership at the top, the scope of what you want to do, a budget that you believe you can achieve it in. I think those are fundamentals in every single project. Then what they did is they empowered the teams, and then the teams went into the detailed design. They actually took people, and this is very important. People were prepared to sacrifice their current jobs and potentially their career paths to join separation full-time to separate the bank, with no knowledge of what happens to you afterwards. That's amazing. That's amazing. And so it's upon Absa, and that's what we are dealing with, is making sure that people who were in separation are a fundamental part of the future of Absa. I think that's very, very important. And then all the rest that you would imagine needs to take place. You need to have a schedule. You need to know when you're going to be landing systems. You need to have teamwork. You need to be able to recover from failings. And we failed a few times. And we had to recover from that. We had to renegotiate with suppliers. We had to change course, selected a certain system. The system didn't work. Stop, self-correct, do another system. So making decisions quickly within the right governance. And I think all of these, and then ultimately courage. Morris, you have to have the courage to make decisions, stick with your decisions, be really ready to admit you've made a mistake and to start again. And all of these factors, I think, and many more, just got us across the line.
So if I can apply a strategic concept, one of my favorite strategic concepts is in the field of capabilities. And in the field of capabilities, one of my favorite academics is a gentleman called Professor David Teese, and he'll be coming and hosting a conference with us, a workshop in the next few days. So I'll actually make sure I can invite you and a few other Absa people. And his view is, he talks about this notion of sensing, seizing, and transforming. So what you were describing then in terms of this notion of making sure you understand your scope and making sure you understand your touch points really speaks to the notion of a shared sense making, which is really important in organizations. And organizations typically just get on with it and do things because we are a machine, right? Yeah. And we don't take the time to sense make, especially in difficult scenarios in which we find ourselves. And so what I'm hearing from you is the importance of slowing down in this madness, in this chaos. Because I do remember when the discussions were happening around the separation of Absa from Barclays, no one believed that this thing was going to succeed, right? The second thing that you spoke about is negotiating the budget, like seizing the opportunity, right? And so I'd like you to maybe expand a little bit more on that. And of course, the final thing in the dynamic capability space is this notion of transforming, right? And transforming is basically saying, now that you've seized the opportunity, how do you transform yourselves? How do you transform your organization to do that? And this really talks to this notion of empowered teams. So if I may, I'm going to ask you, can you talk a little bit about the seizing bit so that we can understand if I, as an organization, I'm looking to renegotiate funding with a shareholder, or I'm looking to renegotiate funding with a bank, all right? Some of the lessons that you had there would be very helpful in enabling us, anybody, to understand what goes into saying what is the right value proposition. So help us to understand in the negotiations around the budget, what went into it, and what can we generically learn from that?
I think one of the big fundamentals right up front was the burning platform. What is your burning platform? You know, and if I apply it to any other scenario I've worked in, if I take ArcelorMittal, where, you know, the survival of the steel industry was at stake. Yeah, your burning platform creates an incredible opportunity for people to come together in a united manner. So that's the first thing. And when you get together like that, it's also bringing all the various stakeholders on board. You know, in Absa's case, it wasn't just employees, it wasn't just the board, but all the regulators. The regulators in South Africa, the regulators in the UK, the regulators in all Africa. You have to bring everybody on board. But I firmly believe when you have this burning platform and you're all focused and committed to this burning platform and you're engaging with your stakeholders and it's the right thing to do, I think it makes it easier to get it across the line. So the executives were determined that for the survival of the bank, for what we need, and the board was determined, we needed to negotiate a financial number that we felt was reasonable in the circumstances. And that determination by those executives and led by Maria was really what got us across the line.
Lovely. So let me just share with you some of the comments that are happening on the chat here. And so let's start off. Earlier in the conversation, we had Mafedi Silepe. I don't know if you know her. I think it's a her. It could be a male. I apologize if I get it wrong, Mafedi. Says, Paul is my CE at Absa. We are led, full stop. The engineering services team sees his leadership. So now this is in the transformation piece that I was talking about. Help us to understand, how do they see your leadership, please, Paul?
Well, firstly, thank you for the comment. I think, you know, leadership evolves. I mean, as an individual, you know, if I compare myself to my 20-year self, you're different, yeah, because your experience has led. So ensuring you trusting your team, you know, backing the team on separation, letting them fail, and letting us all fail. Being prepared to be challenged, listening to solutions, but not letting go of the goal is all about success, and that goes to all the leaders on the separate. We had some heated moments. I mean, there's closed room stuff where you argue, but when you walk out, you have a united solution. It may not be my solution, it could be somebody else's solution, yeah, and that's what you've committed to. And after that, you don't go back there, and you commit to the solution you found, and you deliver on it.
So what's really interesting, Paul, is that you're talking about what intuitively feels like counterintuitive concepts, which is trust your people, allow them to fail, yeah, right? And then allow yourself to follow. So you're the leader, but you're allowing yourself to follow. These aren't easy things. So now let's reflect on Sophia. She says it's hard to comprehend the scale and complexity of separation from Barclays. Imagine trying to unravel something that in 3 years that a company spent more than 15 years putting together. Now, so let's look at your separation fact sheet, for example, so you could give us a sense of what is Sophia talking about when she's referring to scale.
Yeah, so there was all of the policies and systems that Barclays had embedded in Absa, never mind the brand and the billboards and the blue signs, etc. Never mind all of that. That's physical changing of ATMs, branches, uniforms, forms, stationery, you know, down to that level. But let's talk about the system complexity and the process and the policy complexity. When all of the dust settled, we figured out that there was 198 services with a whole lot of sub-services that Barclays provided to Absa. And we had to get off those services and the system supporting those services. We translated that into, and again, here comes the bifurcating into, how do you eat the elephant in small chunks. So splitting up those 198 services into 276 defined projects and allocating funding and teams to deliver on this project. So it's mentally breaking it down into its component parts, and that's why I related it to Eskom. So building a power station like Mthombeni, which in square meterage is slightly bigger than the Sandton CBD, and some of its turbine halls will be as tall, if not taller, than Michelangelo Towers, and you've got 200,000 kilometers of cabling as an example. So how do you even start? So breaking it down, the complexity, breaking it down into doable projects, lining up those projects of what can go first, what can go last, allocating the right resources, allocating the right money. So you've really got to break down the complexity and make it simple. And remember, I don't come from a tech background at all.
Yeah.
And so trusting and relying on these technical resources who really understand what they're talking about is key here.
If I ask you to reflect a little bit more then on this big number that I have in front of me, which is the number of cost to income ratios, all right? So I know that cost to income ratio is something really important into banking groups. I find it fascinating that you as an organization spent over between 50 to 70% more than your peers, while at the same time you managed to achieve significant cost to income ratio declines from over 57% cost to income ratio down to 53.6%. This is at a time when some of your peers, their cost to income ratios went into the opposite direction. So what do you think it was, if it is indeed in the integration and separation project, what is it, do you think, that the separation project contributed to Absa achieving such spectacular results from a cost to income ratio perspective?
Yeah, what I'd like to mention is obviously when you look at the cost income ratios that you've described, we talk about normalized. So we take out some of the effects of separation so we can have a comparable to comparable. But even if you took it with all costs of separation, in the first 6 months of the year, Absa's cost to income ratio declined, despite what we call the post-run costs of separation. Those are the costs of renegotiating contracts, the cost of the amortization of the systems you've landed. So even in that environment, if you look at our IFRS numbers, our cost income ratio declined. But it's not just about the separation. I think under the leadership of the finance director, Jason, together with the ExCo, creating very focused streams as the COVID hit us of really analyzing our cost base. We've done an immense amount of work with our corporate businesses, understanding who sits in corporate, what are the services they offer, what's the cost per service that they're offering, how do you reduce that cost per service, how do you automate better. Separation has given us an incredible understanding of our technology cost base and what our high drivers are and what we need to renegotiate out. So technology is about 20 to 21% of your total cost base. So it's a significant chunk. How do you renegotiate the contracts? How do you make sure you've got your staff working efficiently? How do you have the best solutions on board? Moving into the cloud, moving away from purchase software to build your own. So all of these dynamics are part of our journey and our cost drive to become really competitive.
So in the context then of project management, can I ask you to reflect on some of how differently Absa executed on project management compared to how traditionally project management is expected to be executed?
Well, that's a good question. The principles of project management, whether you're building a Mthombeni or whether you are doing a separation, are the same. You can't escape the principles. What happens though in a technology environment versus building a road, as an example, is it's a more agile environment. So what does that mean? So in a traditional environment, if you're building a road, you've got to grade the road, you've got to put the base course, you've got to put the bitumen, etc., etc. So it's a very what we call a waterfall approach. You have milestones, you have the schedule, and you need to get where you want to. Separation had some of that, definitely, but it also has some of the agile where you build your own. So you build a bit, you test it, you design it, you correct it, you build. You correct, you build. Correct, you build. And you roll out the functionality as you go. So that would be one fundamental difference. But in terms of commitment to schedules, in terms of managing your budget, in terms of making sure your resources are hitting milestones, ensuring that you have the proper team interactions, all those skills of project management apply to Absa, 100%. And reporting. Reporting is key as well, making sure, because you've got all these stakeholders. You know, we met with analysts June of last year, myself and the Chief Separation Officer and Jason. And as the opening remark said, there was almost disbelief when we said we're going to land this a year ago, and we're going to do it in budget. And I suppose not being complacent, not being overconfident, but just having the foresight of where you're going to end up based on where you've come from.
Yeah.
And that's project management.
So starting with the end in mind.
Absolutely.
And working yourself backward. So you
Absolutely.
don't manage forward-looking.
Absolutely.
Manage with a review. And the end is in front of you
coming.
all the time. So as you see, Paul, Mafedi schooled me and said, no, I'm a man, number one. And number two, I'm your alumni, so check your alumni records. So once again, I will do better at that. I'm a new dean, Mafedi, forgive me. It's about data. I'm still catching up and learning to do this job. So what I was asking is, now the reason I'm setting it up that way is I have a person who shares a surname with me who's asking a question. And in case she's my sister from my long-lost mother, I just want to acknowledge that I apologize.
This happened to be Dawn.
Yeah, exactly. So Dawn Mthombeni says, Paul, can Paul explain the risk management approach that they followed for this large-scale program?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn, and good to see you catching in here. Yeah, so there are two other fundamentals to landing big projects, and it's about quality.
Yeah.
And the two components there would be assurance, making sure if I said I'm going to build this, you are building this. And risk management would be absolutely key in any project environment. You are going to be hit by risks that are known, and you've got to identify them, and then you're going to have all the unknowns, and you have to be prepared for all of it. So very strong leadership from our risk departments in Absa, very strong leadership from our assurance providers, working with the project teams to land it. But having said that, we had many projects. What you do is you start building the system, you test. So there's lots of dress rehearsals. You practice and you practice and you practice and you practice, and then you land. And through this process, you're continually evaluating: are you good to land? Are you in amber? Are you in green stage? Or are you red? And there were many projects to the wire. You're kind of reddish, but in amberish. You haven't got time. You take on risk, and you make sure that once you've landed, you've got enough capacity on the other side to quickly correct what you knew was fundamentally might go wrong.
Yeah.
And that was successive. You cannot land everything in green state because you'll never finish.
Yeah.
You have to have the courage, but you do it professionally. You do it with the guidance from the risk and with the guidance from the so a critical part of projects. Absolutely.
I think there's always a temptation in these case studies to focus on the leaders as opposed to focusing on a related concept which is different, which is leadership, right?
Yeah.
And so obviously leadership does not necessarily need to be located in
Absolutely.
the authorized leaders.
Absolutely.
And so I'd like to understand what have you learned about leadership in the broader Absa family from this experience?
So again, my being a non-executive director is a very different role to being an executive. So when I came on as an executive, my two primary roles were land separation, and the second primary role was to make sure while we're landing separation, make sure that technology doesn't fall down. In other words, we can serve our customers. We don't have major incidents and all your other systems are out. So when you come in with that focus, I was not part and have not been part of the Absa business prior to that, in the running of the business. And that Absa business was weaning itself off the Barclays way. And so we are undergoing a significant culture journey led by Daniel Manelli. But I was kind of isolated, with the teams and saying, we have to land this, and guys, we better make sure these systems remain up. So you're almost like in a bubble while everything else is going on. And now as you come out of this bubble, we launch new initiatives we want to do to determine our strategy. You have to say, well, how do I take the best of that and the best of what we currently build and find common direction? And that's what Daniel Manelli is currently busy with. Yeah.
So Daniel and his executive enabled a culture of focus, but a culture of empowerment. Help us to understand what does that mean at a practical level. So what surprises do you learn about maybe your bench strength and the skills and talent from a leadership perspective?
I'm trying to relate it to many of the things you see on YouTube. And related to sport, maybe a little bit. Just because the person walks in and seems to be the fittest and seems to be the best defined, doesn't mean that's the person for the job. So what I certainly learned is the wide network in Absa of people stepping out of their day jobs, stepping into this, and their determination to make sure they succeed. So the teamwork in those project teams was extremely powerful. Yes, you need the conductors who lead it. The interesting thing is that you talk about an enabling environment, and I have to give credit to the board, because Maria did all the negotiations. We were in the thrusts of the journey in 2018. Maria then left, if you recall, and we had an interim CEO right through Renee through 2019. Daniel only joined now at the back end. So in 3 changes of CEO, this journey carried on. And you can say, but it surely should have failed. No, because you're working in that bubble. You've got the cover and the commitment of the board. You've got a task that you've all been given, and you drive it home. And everything else is irrelevant to that. So that's quite a good lesson, that despite changes, here was this team in a bubble getting stuff done.
So what I'm hearing is, even if there's turbulence around us, you need to create a safe space. You need to create stability, particularly for those people that are tasked with the critical changes in an organization. So the rest of us could be firefighting.
Exactly.
All right?
That's it.
But the few should not be firefighting. They should be focused on building that bridge.
That's it.
That's going to help us to make our way across it, away from the fire, away from the chaos, into the promised land.
And that's where leaders help as opposed to the leadership, because the leader can keep the noise away. Lock the door.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll deal with that.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll say let them get on with it, and that's where it's key.
Lovely. So building on that, what kind of attributes in key talent do you need in managing that dichotomy of, on the one hand, the managing the noise out there, and then on the other, building the bridge? Because what this program was doing was building the bridge into a better future.
Into the future.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of clever people, really far brighter than I am, with deep information technology knowledge, finding those people, letting them do what they need to do, having light touch leadership around them to make sure they can do what they do, stepping in when you see there's problems that you need to help resolve, but as you say, keeping the noise away. So recognizing those people, letting them get on with it. There's some highly talented people, both in Absa and from some of the suppliers.
So did you have to change your talent management strategies during this period, or were you using talent management capabilities that you had already built?
Yeah,
for this?
That's the amazing thing.
Yeah.
We were using the talent within the company,
Yeah.
who we may not have given credit for what exists.
Yeah.
And that's the amazing part. There's some, as I said, there's really talented people. We gave them opportunity and they shone.
So on that, let's build on that. So there's a guy called Roy Rampal, and he wants to know, before I go to Roy, because he's going to move us in a different direction, let's focus on Bennett Maluleka. Bennett wants to know, how would the demerger have played out if Absa did not have in-house expertise or team to execute on the plan?
With difficulty. Absa is complex. We have our African regions, and each of them are different, and each of them, in many instances, have a standardized system. We have our corporate investment bank, which also is different, and then we have our retail bank in South Africa. Although they were less affected by separation, they're still part of the same estate. So while you're changing here, you can't affect them. And so had you brought in a total outsourced crowd, I personally don't believe you would have had a chance.
So it's quite important at a country level to say we have hollowed out a lot of our skills, but not all of our skills. So those organizations that still are holding on to good talent, hold on to them
and expand them and grow them.
Right? And those organizations that don't have, maybe that's where you should start. So before you even think of bringing outsiders, you could be throwing good money to bed. Firstly, rebuild your talent in-house. And then once you've got a core base of talent in-house, then you can think of bringing external to supplement and complement that talent, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's, I'm very pro-local. And if I relate it to my Eskom experience, so because of the delay of the Big Build program, when it eventually got off the ground in 2007, the skills to build, the Eskom had last built a power station 10 years before that. So there was nobody there. So sure, you have your boiler experts, you have your turbine experts, and you have your engineers who run the day-to-day jobs, but the art of project management was outsourced. The teams that supported us, we outsourced, and we tried to build Eskom skills while we were going. That's not ideal.
So Kulebogile says, Mueketsi says, please ask Paul, what's the criteria that he or the bank uses to choose technology as part of the separation journey? So clearly there's criteria for business as usual, and there's criteria for this huge transformation. Yeah. So can you talk to us about some of those criteria?
Yeah, so there is a difference. Separation had a finite date, 5th of June, and we had to effectively, I think it's up there in the stats, we had to take on 167 different applications that Barclays had, and we had to decide, are we going to take the Barclays application, upgrade it a little bit and drop it in our estate, or we're going to rebuild. So those technical decisions with a 5th of June deadline and a certain amount of money are very different in a BAU environment.
Yeah.
Very different. You have to make the decision, you have to stick with it. When we found bad decisions, we had to quickly reverse that, and I think the stats speak for themselves. Out of the 167, we actually took 45 of Barclays' current systems, we refined them a bit, and we dropped them into our estate. The rest we built.
Yeah.
We refreshed, we did our own thing. So that balance was important, given a finite date, given a finite budget. Had you been given 17 billion to do what you like and a little bit more time, you may have made different choices.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So I know that, banks and insurance companies are very different because these are highly regulated institutions. Yeah. So I can see the success of this project would have been very positive for the regulators because it means that they don't have to worry about your operational resilience,
Exactly,
for example.
exactly.
And even for shareholders, because they can be assured that they don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to miss your targets. And as I said earlier, even though Absa has been severely negatively affected by COVID, you still increased your revenue by 3% to 40.1 billion rand over the half year to June, which is really spectacular. So shareholders are happy, regulators are happy. So I want to ask you, and I hope it's not an unfair question, are customers happy? Because this is a question that Roy Rampal was asking, which is, any comments regarding customer transformation from Barclays-centric to Absa-centric?
Well, I mean, you know, if we ever sat and said here that customers are satisfied 100% of the time, you know, we'd be completely wrong. What we did have to do, and separation, we must almost exclude our local South African retail banking, who were not affected too much by separation from a system perspective. They were affected by the brand and name change. So their digital journey and what they need to do and how they respond to customers has been ongoing since the 2017, when Barclays announced. Now they could determine their own strategy, because the strategy came from Barclays, and that's what Ari Reitenbach and his team are busy with. In separation, though, we because we had, I think I'm just trying to reflect, the last year there were 35 weekends where we were dropping new systems and trying to keep customers happy. So I think we only had one instance in this entire journey where we were not successful on a certain drop, but we managed to recover ourselves. So customers had a bigger outage than what we expected, but we communicated continually with the customers. Now that we've separated, particularly in African regional operations and CIB, we have an opportunity to really transform and answer the customer's needs, because we were just in those areas. We got to move these systems. We've got to get off Barclays systems. So we were trying to keep customers stable, but we might not have had all the value add that customers require, and that's the journey now.
So Paul, I could read out what Nomonde is saying. So just in case you think I don't know who my alumni is, so Nomonde Whitendlovu is one of our alumni. So I hope I'm redeeming myself. So she says I was one of the leaders that worked for Paul, and she says that you care about the detail, and she gives examples about how you not only stayed in the hallowed halls of the executive suites, you moved building to close to the project team, you attended meetings that most chief executives and exco members of banks would not typically attend, and that made you, obviously caused some confusion, because that's not the culture that the Absa people were used to. But what it seems, what I'm taking from Nomonde, is that was part of the transformation from a leadership modeling perspective that could be attributed to the success. Can you talk about, at a personal level, what were some of those decisions you made, and what informed it, and where do you think you saw results, and which are some of your choices that didn't work?
My style that I've learned over many years is to really take complexity and try to simplify it. And in the process of doing that, you have to know your detail. You know, I don't ever want to be in a situation where I didn't have enough facts at my disposal or joined enough dots and then try and make a decision. I just can't do that. I'm not smart enough to do that. I have to be able to join that. So we got in. So I was very active in trying to unlock what needed to be done, because when we had to respond in a crisis situation, when something went wrong, you don't have to have weeks and weeks of trying to get you up to speed. You're actually living it, and then you can quickly move down to that level of detail and help the team solve what we need to do. So in certain circumstances, we actually had to self-correct and actually change a supplier. You know, in the middle of a program, you're actually changing a major supply, getting a new one on, and dreaming that you can still deliver it. So those sort of things, it's just about style. I'm not saying my style is this, the way to go. It's just what I am. I have to understand. I have to simplify it, and I have to understand the detail.
Well, maybe if we stay there as we're about to conclude on the slide, Tshepiso then says, just share a little bit more about what kind of strategies you have around people. How do you get them to see the vision, go along with it, and support it? How did the journey impact employees in this context?
People are people. It's not just a saying. I mean, people are your asset. Constant communication, constant town halls with the teams, visiting the teams, giving teams the leeway. Some of these teams work 52 weekends in a row, making sure that they cover each other, they have breaks between, making sure that your reward systems, accommodate what needs to be achieved, continual motivation. And hopefully at the end of it, you have a team that wants to stay. But you can never ever do all the right things. It's just a continual journey in life. Yeah. And you look back and say, oh no, we shouldn't have done that, or we could have done this better. So as long as you continually acknowledge that and improve it, that's how you get the best out of people.
Yeah. So Paul, we have picked up some really interesting insights around how to deal with a burning platform, how to deal with complexity, how to deal with skills and consultants. And I don't think we've spent enough time talking about the consultant relationship. And so before we close out, I'd like you to comment a little bit about the consultant relationship, because consultancies have had a very bad rep in our country. So whether you're talking about the role of KPMG, the role of McKinsey, the role of Deloitte, the role of PwC, the role of EY, like I can't think of one large named Bain, McKinsey, and so forth who can stand up and say, no, I wasn't involved in any bad reputation activities from a consultancy perspective. So I'd like to know, what can we learn from the Absa experience about best practice in working with consultants? Because I read in your fact sheet that you had over 1,000 consultancy touch points throughout the program. But clearly, you, in order for you to do that kind of work with consultants and achieve that kind of spend and result in such a short period of time, there must be some interesting lessons there regarding your relationship with consultants.
And it's consultants and suppliers, so not just consultants. So, so anybody you're bringing in to help you. So
and outside a third party.
Absolutely. So I think you can't personally. You can't outsource the crown jewels. You have to take ownership for the project. You have to take complete accountability for the delivery. You cannot turn around at the end of the day and say we failed because so-and-so failed us. I think that's the very important thing. When you bring these third parties on board, you have to be very clear what it is they're there for and what it is they're not there for. Because scope creep is what you need to control. Because once they're in, then suddenly you had 100 and now there's 1,000 people. So you have to be very certain about what they do, because there's no doubt you don't have all the skills. You don't. And you certainly don't have all the resource capability. So you have to be very, very choosy about how you get them on. It even goes down to leaders in your teams having personal interviews with the people they're bringing on your site, so that you're comfortable that those people will fit in your teams, are really knowing what they need to do, and then you just need to manage them like any outsourced provider. There's a serious amount of skills in all these companies you've mentioned, but my view as Absa, you can't outsource that. Yeah, we must own it.
So looking into the future, I don't think you'll be given another 17 billion rand in a hurry. to
COVID relief.
Is that how you're going to cloak it? You're going to call it COVID relief for technologists. What's next for Paul and for your team, and how are you being repurposed to support the Absa strategy? And these then are our closing remarks.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. We're in COVID. We've landed separation, and I think it would be great to have Daniel Manelli here.
Absolutely, I look forward to speaking to Daniel,
because he needs to talk about how he's repositioning the strategy. So we're an enabler.
Yeah.
That's what we are in tech. We're not frontline facing, and we're not customer facing. Our customer is internal. And so we enable the strategy that needs to be carried out. And Absa has a strategy, and it was established when we left Barclays. We're now, through Daniel's leadership, refining, repurposing, and refocusing what needs to be done. And tech is there to stand up to the plate and deliver. And all of these people are all available to deliver for Absa.
Yeah. So the question, I suppose, from a strategy is for all of us to think about is strategy as a support or strategy as a core part of the strategy technology as a support of strategy, or technology as the core of the strategy delivery mechanism.
So we've had this debate in the banks, and other banks may differ. So there is a view in some areas globally that, are we a technology company who happens to own a bank, or we a bank who's got superior technology, and it's the latter.
Lovely. I think it's great to be clear. It's great to be focused. On behalf of SABSA, I'd like to take this opportunity to once again thank Paul O'Flaherty, my Irish strive to come back. And I really want to thank you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with Daniel. Incidentally, he and I share similar hairdressers, so I think we'll be fine. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.